This is Sadiq Khan bringing you your latest edition of Speak to Sadiq on LBC with James O'Brien. I'm here for the next 30 minutes taking your calls. This is your chance to put any question you like to me, the Mayor of London. I'll do my best to answer. So the numbers for you to get your questions on air are 0345 6060 973, or you can email sadiq@lbc.co.uk, or you can text on 84850. Don't forget, you can also watch Speak to Sadiq on the website, lbc.co.uk, or live on LBC's Facebook page. Good morning, James. How are you, sir?
Morning, Sadiq Khan. I'm very well indeed. I'm going to take a back seat today. I'm going to let you crack on.
Crikey. Do you know how to do that, James?
Whenever you start obfuscating or bloviating, I will, of course, blow my whistle and pile in. But there's a lot
LBC
to
listeners, let's see how soon before James O'Brien breaks his promise to take the back seat. And let's take the first caller, Mo from Edgware. Good morning, Mo.
Hi, Mr. Khan. Hi, James.
Hello.
I'll just quickly, before I ask a question, what your stance on whether this lady Begum should be allowed back into the country. What is your opinion on this? Should she be allowed back in?
Okay, is that your question?
Well, my question is, should she be allowed back in? And depending on your answer, is going to be my follow-up.
Sure. Well, look, thanks for your question. Look, the numbers a way to begin answering that question. I've for some time expressed my concern about young people, vulnerable people being radicalised, being groomed, being indoctrinated. And I think if anybody listening is worried about anybody, it's really important you ring the authorities. The counter-terror hotline are there to help people, and the number is 0800 789 321. As far as this individual person is concerned, I think what's important is for the authorities, that means the police, that means the other authorities, to speak to her if she decides to want to return to the UK, to consider whether any criminal offences have been committed. If they have, then it's really important that following due process she faces a trial, and we'll have to wait and see what happens in relation to that. I think it's really important, Mo, for me as somebody who's a public figure, not to inadvertently prejudice a future trial, but it's really important if people we think have committed criminal offences, they should be investigated.
She has, because she just joined a terrorist organisation. You know, that's okay with rape and beheadings and torture. You know, her husband is linked to the Rock Festival terrorist attack. So why would you even consider risking it? And you're still not answering my question, you know. And at the end of the day, she may have the right to come back if she manages to find her way back. Right, but clearly we need to change the law around that. That's absolutely ridiculous. You know, she's clearly a threat to this country. She has... I'm going
to pause you there, Mo, briefly. She's not. That's the point, isn't it? She's not clearly a threat to this country. But if it was established that she is, then everything you've said would hold true.
Mo, those are some of the questions that you'd expect to be investigated by the police and by the authorities. That's why I've got to be very careful. Of course, I've read the article in yesterday's Times. By the way, we always criticise journalists. This is a piece of excellent journalism, in my view. I find it fascinating, and you know, we should credit the journalists for the excellent piece of work. I think the problem is this. I don't know the full facts. We rely upon the newspaper article, but what I do know is that there is provision in law for the authority to speak to anybody before they come to our country, and if they do arrive in our country, for them to be properly interviewed and investigated, and then charges to be brought. And it's really important for that to happen if that is the case.
You're not going as far as Sajid Javid, are you? He says, we get this absolutely right, I will not hesitate to prevent your return if you have supported terrorist organisations abroad.
Well, I think where I differ from the Home Secretaries, I remember some of my previous experience as a lawyer, which I think my understanding is, unless somebody has dual citizenship or is a national for another country, you can't make them stateless. That's what the international law is. But there is provision there, and I think if it is the case that the police and the other authorities that we know about speak to this person in the country that she's in, and we think she may have committed an offence, as Mo's alluding to, of course those provisions are there, and I think those provisions are there for a good reason. If we think somebody's going to come to this country, not be conducive to public good, is a threat to our safety and threat to national security, of course these powers are there and they should be used.
Mo?
Yeah.
Would you rather see her in a British jail or a Syrian refugee camp?
Well, do you know, this is going to sound a bit harsh. I would just rather not step foot into land where my children are. I don't want to share the same thing. And at the end of the day, Mr. Khan, you have a duty, do you not, to protect Londoners? And
well, he doesn't have any legal influence over this. So you'd rather she stayed in a Syrian refugee camp? So no legal process, no questioning, no interrogation, and very little chance of her unborn baby surviving.
I would rather her never step foot in this land again because my children are here.
Fair enough. Sadiq Khan, let me phrase the question slightly differently, if I may. Should the British government be making any effort whatsoever to bring this woman back? That's not quite the same as asking whether she should be allowed in.
No, I agree with Ben Wallace here. I think Ben Wallace was asked that question yesterday, and the point Ben Wallace made was he doesn't think British life should be risked or resources expended on this individual. I appreciate, by the way, and I spoke about this 3 years ago when we heard about young Londoners being groomed and radicalised. There is an issue about that, and we need to make sure we stop that happening. But I think Ben Wallace was right to say that actually what we don't want to do is be spending monies or risking lives to try and extract people when there are concerns about national security, concerns about offences being committed.
Mo, final question to you, actually, because I find this story fascinating on every level. Would you feel any different if she was incredibly remorseful, if she was weeping and wailing and explaining how it had all happened and how she's never felt, she couldn't have felt more wrong or more stupid or more evil, and she's completely repented, or would you feel the same as you do now?
I'm more angry because she has already expressed that she still supports, the extremists. But no, I still wouldn't feel that she should be allowed back in the country if she was remorseful. However, the fact that she's showing no remorse at all and already has shown support, I think suggests that she is still radicalised. And we're basically talking about letting an extremist, a terrorist, with those views back in our country, and that is a definite threat.
That is that is absolutely one extremely valid perspective. I think the next caller has a rather different one.
Okay, thank you for that, Mo. The next caller is from Camden. It's Doc.
Yes, good morning. Is that Mr. Khan?
It is. Good morning.
Okay. This London, she's one of your constituents, more or less. She's an unfortunate, she made a stupid decision. She ended up a prisoner of war. And the Geneva Convention says that prisoners of war should be treated and resettled in a civilised way.
Well, I do not want to talk about this individual for the reasons that I've said, but let me talk to you in general terms. From what I've read in the newspaper, I understand that a refugee camp is different from somebody in relation to the circumstances you're describing, although you're right about international law and the Geneva Convention. The British law is quite clear in relation to what we need to do to make sure we keep...
The Geneva Convention, Mr. Khan, the Geneva Convention is not just British law, it is international law.
Well, I was about to come to international law, but let me finish the point, and then you can interrupt me again if I don't answer your point.
So I apologise for the interruption.
International law is quite clear. What nobody's allowed to do is to make somebody stateless. So, for example, a British citizen is not a national of another country, let alone a citizen of another country. My understanding of international law is you can't revoke citizenship and make them stateless. My understanding from memory is you can do that if somebody has another citizenship or another nationality. So if, for example, somebody was to arrive at our port in this country from another country and there was a concern that they've committed a criminal offence, then I think it's really important for the police and the authorities to investigate that person and for due process to follow. And that could lead to, by the way, Doc, this person being charged in a court and facing a trial. So that's why I'm trying to be careful not to prejudice any future trial. But that's a different point from whether there is an obligation on the British government to go into prisoner of war camps and extract people whose views give the impression that person is still somebody who may have committed a criminal offence, or his views that we find abhorrent, aside from the concerns around criminal law. And that's the question that Mo was alluding to, that James picked me up on. Do I think we should be taking steps to extract an individual who may have committed criminal offences? And I think the answer to that is no in this particular case. Well,
Mr. Khan, I disagree with you. My answer is yes. And I'm blinking Home Secretary as a buffoon for encouraging the hotheads and ignoramuses, making comments about her being a soldier and this sort of thing. Well, if she's a soldier, then she's entitled to the protection to protect her.
No, but you can't. Forgive me, Doc. She's not a soldier.
Well, your people, what his name? The previous presenter of yours, he said she's a soldier.
Well, you can take that up. You can take that up with him. But
can I just distinguish this point, which is really important? We don't mislead listeners about the Geneva Convention. If it was the case that a member of the British Armed Forces was in a prisoner of war camp, my answer to the question of extraction would be very different to somebody in the case that you're describing, Doc. And so we've got to distinguish the two. And I wouldn't want listeners to think that the Geneva Convention applies to a situation that's different from what it's talking about. And it's really important for us to distinguish those two things.
I think we'll move on. We shall. I will almost certainly be discussing this story a little later in the programme.
Doc, thanks for your call, as I thank Mo as well. The next caller is from Hampstead. Good morning, Caroline.
Hello, you all right?
Not bad at all. How are you, mate?
I'm good.
Right.
Hi, James.
Morning, Caroline. Carry on, please. All these minutes that we use on niceties and greetings are minutes that I don't...
I know, sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry, Caroline. James used to be really nice to him on his normal show. What's your question, Caroline?
Right, I'm calling about the school walkouts for the protest today. I kind of just wanted to get Sadiq's opinion on it, what his sort of feeling is being in a government position. And I'm just talking from experience from the Iraq War. When I was back in school, we actually organised a school walkout protest on that day, on the 15th of Feb 2003. Yeah. I just wanted to sort of share the impact it had on me for the rest of my life, in the sense of like the empowerment, I suppose,
Sure.
it gave. But anyway, I'd like to just get Sadiq's opinion on it.
Thanks, Caroline.
Whether you'd let your kids go.
Yeah, we probably met on one of those marches in 2003, by the way. But look, yesterday I hosted a Clean Air Summit in London, and we had a presentation from UNICEF, and I met a number of young children who'd come to the Clean Air Summit to speak to politicians and lobby us about clean air, about the air in London and across the country. And they asked questions, not just of myself, but of Michael Gove, Matt Hancock, and many other mayors and leaders across the country. And the point that I've made is we can be the last generation not to get it, or the first generation to get it. And the children that are protesting today are going to face the consequences of our inaction in relation to climate change and the issues they're protesting about. I think it's a good thing for young people to get active in politics, for them to engage. I think we've got to give young people the skills to articulate their frustrations and to protest, write letters, do petitions. Because if we don't, what happens is they are frustrated and become cynical, which is a step after becoming apathetic. So, it's disappointing that people are missing school, but I think it's important for us to encourage public education and for people to use lawful means to protest. And by the way, it's relevant to the last questions as well. If young people can't find lawful, peaceful ways to protest, to express their views, it could be about foreign policy, it could be about climate change. What happens is preachers of hate and other charismatic people lead them astray, particularly if they're vulnerable or they're young. And that's why if somebody's doing a lawful thing, which is protesting outside the, inverted commas, mother of all parliaments, people like you have been inspired in relation to becoming active, I think that's a good thing.
Would you, and I don't want to know what they are doing because that's neither fair nor relevant, but would you encourage or discourage your own children from joining
It depends what lessons were being missed. I wouldn't, but no, generally, it's half term. It's half term.
So if it was PE, carry on, fill your boots, but if it's maths...
I think the fact that these children have organised the protest the last day before half term, they probably know from their experience not as much work gets done on the Friday before half term as would otherwise be the case. And I think I'm somebody who encourages young people to be active, and I think it's really encouraging. You're going to see not just children, but older children, 16, 17, and others, showing their concern about climate change. And I hope it puts pressure on people like me, Caroline, who face elections, and these guys will be on the register in a few years' time, and we'll be asking for their support. What's your view, Caroline?
Well, I think that the strategy of having it before half term begins. I mean, on the Nick Ferrari show, there was a couple of guys saying what a nightmare it was logistically and safeguarding, which
that's a very good point, isn't it?
Now.
That's a very valid point.
It's a great point. I'm an adult. I've got a kid now, and 100%. I think that is a nightmare. But the thing is when I was in school, the word about it got around, and the sort of ringleaders of the protest got summoned into the headmistress's office. I went to a girls' school in London, just like a state school, but it was sort of, we're bringing young women into the world, we want them to be strong and opinionated, yes. And we thought, oh, look at this, we're getting called in, we're going to get told that we've got to stay in school, otherwise we're going to get suspended. And our headmistress called us in, and she thought it was all very dramatic. Back to us, she sort of swiveled round in her chair, and she said, I hear you're planning to protest, and
I'm going to push you to the punchline, Caroline, please.
Oh, okay. Punchline being, She allowed us to go as long as we wore our school blazers.
Well, you could make a case, a responsible headmistress could make a case for it being an educational experience, but Sadiq Khan, the father, rather than the lawyer or the politician there, observing that it depends on what they would actually be missing academically, which seems reasonable.
Caroline, thanks for your call. The next caller is somebody who James and I probably know. He's somebody who's been doing lots of excellent work, in my view, around the Garden Bridge and other stuff. It's Mr. Will Hurst from the Architects Journal. Good morning, Will. Not sure we've actually spoken before.
No, nice to talk to you.
Can I just congratulate you on the work you've been doing over the last few years on the Garden Bridge?
Can we crack on with Will's question, please?
What's the question, Will? Because otherwise James will moan.
Yes, well, as you know, this week TfL released a lot of new information, and we now know that of the total £43 million bill to the taxpayer of this unbuilt project, around half of that, 21.4 million, is down to the signing of a construction contract for a project that was never in a position to start construction. Now, of course, I know, Mr. Khan, that this was not your doing. This happened right at the start of 2016, before you were elected, and that was under Boris Johnson's watch. But wouldn't you agree with me that this was simply an excusable thing to do for the previous administration to allow this contract to be signed?
Well, look, Will, I'd go further than that. I think what was clear is Boris Johnson knew he would no longer be the mayor in May 2016, and he rushed things through, got things signed off, hoping it reached the point of no return. And that's one of the reasons why the timeline, and you've written about this, it leads to questions being asked and suspicions being raised, which is why that he suddenly rushed things through and break his own conditions before May 2016. You'll be aware that I refused to spend any more of the taxpayers' money for which I was responsible after I became mayor, albeit TfL was the administrator for DFT money.
I'm asking about a very specific thing, if you'll forgive me, which is the TfL allowing, and the mayor indeed at the time, Boris Johnson, allowing the Garden Bridge Trust to put signatures on the construction contract with Bouygues, the contractor which was going to deliver the bridge. Now, that, as I say, has led to £21.4 million of loss to the taxpayer. And indeed, it was done breaking the funding agreement that was there in black and white between the Garden Bridge Trust and TfL. That had 6 conditions, and at least 2 of them were broken in that decision to sign the contract. So I'm asking if you can defend what happened there.
Well, one of the things that the TfL have done recently is get an opinion from a barrister, a QC, to advise them whether they can withhold payments to the trust because of any breaches. And the advice from the QC was...
Have you not looked at it? It's fine for a QC to look at it, and I think his conclusion was that TfL couldn't withhold any money because it had all happened under their watch. So they're just as culpable as the Garden Bridge Trust. But I'm asking you if you've looked at the evidence.
Well,
it seems a pretty crucial thing to have happened.
Yeah, no, sure. I mean, well, you and I can put ourselves in positions of the QC, but if TfL have spent the money...
I'm not asking about the QC, I'm asking you.
As the Mayor of London, as the Mayor of London, my assessment is what I don't want to do is be sued by anybody and have to pay damages and costs as a consequence of not following a legal opinion. And the legal opinion is that TfL have to pay this money over, albeit I'm very angry about it. But what TfL have done is not pay over the full amount asked for by the Garden Bridge Trust, nor the full amount the DFT gave. The DFT gave, if you remember, an additional £15 million. That's now gone down to, I think it's 5.3 million. Yeah, 9. No, that 9 million was reduced further. I'm still unhappy about this because, as you said, this is £53 million of money wasted on a project for which you can't point to anything. A significant amount of that is taxpayers' money, and I'm glad
Have you looked at the 66 conditions and explained to yourself in your own mind how TfL enabled the trust to sign this and break the conditions of their own funding agreement?
That's one of the things I looked at.
There's only 6 of them. I mean, I can send you them. Or I can tell you what they are, if you like.
Well, that's one of the things I looked at when I first became mayor, which is one of the reasons I made the decision not to give this project any additional funding, but also one of the reasons why I asked for an independent review to be done into this.
Are we knocking at the door here of...
They didn't have the land permissions they needed. That was one of the conditions. And they didn't have the money to operate the Garden Bridge for at least 5 years. That was another one of the conditions. Neither of those were met.
So I want to be clear,
Mike
Will.
Brown, the commissioner, allowed the trust to go ahead. He's still the commissioner, and he was in place at the time.
That's the point, isn't it, that we're dancing around, is how can Mike Brown still be in post when he signed off on something that appears to have broken TfL's own rule?
Because the decision taken by the previous mayor before May 2016, the mayoral decision, was one which TfL followed through. And it happens, by the way, in government as well, where ministers don't follow the advice they're given and direct civil servants to do stuff that they want them to do. We've seen it happen with cabinet secretaries and them signing documents by the perms that gives.
There was no pushback. You would expect the civil service did push back against the DfT and tried to stop this money going. We know that because the permanent secretary wrote a letter and had to be overruled.
Well, exactly. Well, this is one of the reasons why I asked the former chair of the Public Accounts Committee, Margaret Hodge, to look into this issue, and she published her report and all the documents to do with that report. And that's one of the reasons why TfL got the advice from AQC to advise them what they were able to do. I agree there are questions to be asked about Boris Johnson's decisions taken when he was mayor, and that's one of the reasons why if the NAO or the Public Accounts Committee were to look into this, we'd provide them with all the documentations that we've got, most of it, I think all of which have been published, which is really important for there to be transparency.
Briefly, Will, what would you like to see the mayor do differently?
Well, I think, he needs to be much, much tougher in demanding a public inquiry or a select committee inquiry.
Are you worried about that? Because people will ask questions about why heads haven't rolled at TfL.
I'm very happy for the Public Accounts Committee to look into this. I'm very happy for the NAO to look into this.
You should be demanding. It's a matter of public confidence. You said earlier, Mr. Khan, talking about climate change, that people could get cynical and that could turn to apathy. Exactly the same thing applies here. It's trust in politics.
Yeah. 50-odd million pounds worth of public money down the toilet, and you're saying, I'd be happy with a public account, but you should be shouting from the rooftops that we need a judge-led...
We have made representations to the PAC. The Deputy Mayor has spoken to the Chair of the PAC about this matter. There's a very good reason why we've got an ex-chair of the PAC looking at this, but as far as public confidence is concerned, and even Will Hurst would have to accept this, there have been significant changes into processes since I became mayor in relation to transparency, in relation to the processes that take place on procurement, in relation to my ability to make decisions, because of vanity and other reasons, and even Will Hurst would have to accept these major changes have been made. The question that Will is asking is in relation to action that I should take in relation to decisions made before I became mayor. And that's one of the reasons why I made sure there's full transparency in the documentations we had. We've made sure we've had an independent inquiry from Margaret Hodge. But with respect to Will Hurst, rather than going for my jugular, I think he should be focusing his attention towards Boris Johnson and the question that needs to be answered by him.
Well, you obviously haven't read his latest article in the Architect's Journal, because that's about as close to the jugular as I've seen any journalist go in the context of the former Mayor of London in a very long time. Well, keep in touch. I appreciate that this is far from finished business from your point of view, and indeed the point of view of anybody, regardless of their politics, who still feels that £43 million worth of public money being spent on a bridge without a brick being laid is not something that we want to push into the long grass.
There are other issues as well. There's more than £5 million spent on an estuary airport that's not seen the light of day. There's £320,000 on a water cannon that's never been used, and I could go on.
Yes.
The next question is from the city. It says here, it's Russell. Russell, where in the city are you?
The Square Mile.
Hi, good morning. Yes, the City of London. I'm in Moorgate.
Are you working, or are you? Is that where you live?
No, I'm working.
Can we crack on, Russell? Don't let him distract you with the small talk.
Working very hard.
Thanks, Russell. I've got to go.
My question to you is whether you are. So my question is on housing. So housing is one of the most pressing issues facing London. I think that's fair to say. In your campaign in 2015-16, you had a lot of noise about solving the housing crisis, the shortage, and pledged in your London plan that you would build 65,000 homes per annum, and that half of those would be social housing. Your latest numbers, though, that I think were released last week, show social housing completions between April and December at just 3,500. So that's just 10% of what you pledged 3 years ago.
Russell, what's your source of that information? What's your source of that information?
The GLA housing start statistics from your own office that were published last week.
For the 65,000?
No, that's your London plan.
Oh,
so
I see.
Your pledge is 65,000 homes. So
well, let me try and answer that question, because I often read Tory propaganda, and it looks like something from Tory propaganda. Let me do with your question first.
Hang on.
Let me do with your question. Well, you've asked the question. Let me answer it. Well, let me answer your question in a straight way, as you try to ask the straight question. Look, for the last since the 1970s in our great city, roughly speaking, the number of homes being built is between 20 and 30,000. The last time we had significant homes built more than that was when councils were building them. What we do know in the 8 years before I became mayor is the definition of an affordable home is one which is either 80% market value or £450,000. What I've done when I become mayor is to ditch that dodgy definition. So I've made it hard for myself, because I've said an affordable home is one where you pay social rent, council rent, London living rent, a third of average earnings, or shared ownership, part buy, part rent. And I've also set myself targets that would break records. So last year, my target for homes that should be begun that are affordable, genuinely affordable, was 12,500. Had I met that target, I would have broken all records. I broke that target. We started last year more than 12,500 homes. But out of those also, 2,800 were homes where you pay a social rent more than the previous 4 years put together. This year I've set myself a target of 14,000 genuinely affordable homes. And as somebody who is an expert, as you appear to be, you will know that most starts appear in quarter 3 and quarter 4. I'm confident that this year we will break again the record for most numbers of genuinely affordable homes begun, more than 14,000. The bigger question, though, is the number of homes overall. And the draft London plan says that London needs 66,000 homes a year overall. Now, we've not done that since the 1970s. And so what I'm saying to the government is give us more funds, give us more resources to do that. But it's in the context of the macroeconomics. And for somebody who works in the city, I'm surprised you've not seen the concerns the city has about Brexit, about lack of investment, about developers withholding. So look, subject to macroeconomics being okay, I think we can accelerate the numbers of homes started in London. I'm confident we can break the record again this year, notwithstanding Tory propaganda.
So where does this 3,500 figure come from then?
So it's quarter 2, so there's four quarters for starts. I'm not sure where the 3,500 comes from.
But
quarter 3 and quarter 4.
Are we discussing completed houses, and then the mayor is discussing started houses? I just want to clarify why you think this number is so significant.
Question of completion. So look, people don't get housed in starts; they get housed in completed.
Just to clarify. So when he uses a figure like 12,500, that's the number of houses that have been started, and when you use a figure like 3,500, that's the number that were finished in the relevant. No, this is for me to understand, Russell. That's all.
Let's be clear.
Yes, we are being clear. He's talking about houses that have been started, and you're talking about houses that have been completed within the relevant 3-month period.
Yes, indeed.
So I'm clear now.
The GLA's own numbers that show that only 3,400 social homes were completed by the GLA between April 2018
so
and December.
Just to be clear then, you're worried that some of the houses that have been started won't be finished?
Well, no, I'm saying that starts are irrelevant because completions are the only real measure.
You can't finish them unless you start them, Russell.
Well, no, indeed, but 12,500 starts the year before has not translated into completions. We have only seen 3,400 completions.
And how long does it take on average to build a house?
Well, I don't know.
You need to, don't you?
Well, let me answer. Let me answer that for you, Russell.
I just wanted to be clear on what the numbers meant, because a lot of people listening will be bamboozled by the figures being thrown around. So the distinctions, to be clear, are between the completed houses within a relevant 3-month window, which Russell has cited. You're citing the started houses within a relevant 12-month window. And unless we are genuinely fearful of houses being started but not finished, Russell, with respect, I'm not quite sure what the point of your question is.
No. The point of my question is that this is an 8-month window, so it's almost the entirety of 2018. And again, only 3,400
Yes, that's it, have been completed. And you're worried that all the ones...
And the year before that was 5,300. So actually, over a 2-year period, only about 9,000 homes have been completed.
So you might be starting a lot, Mayor Khan, but you're not finishing enough.
Well, I think Russell's making my point for me, which is these homes that are being completed now were homes that were given permission and started before I became mayor. It takes some time for homes to be built. So what happens is, normally, a developer will negotiate the purchasing of land, will also speak to council's pre-application to see what sort of permission will be granted. They then take some time, they purchase that land, they then speak to the council to see what's permissible. They will then apply for permission. The council will take some time to consider that, will negotiate, and will then decide whether to give permission. If it's above a certain site, it comes to City Hall. They consider the application and decide whether to give permission or to make changes or to
So
reject
give
it.
us a year when Russell can come back to us then and say...
Well, that's why if you're going to hold me to account, the best way to hold me to account is the numbers of homes we start. By the way, for genuinely affordable homes, James, we will not be giving them the monies unless they're completed. So,
when? Tell him when to come back and count again.
Count on starts each year. Look at the numbers.
But he wants to count completions. He doesn't want to count starts.
Well, the completions for the foreseeable future will be, roughly speaking, 30,000. And that will be because...
So 6 months from now we can check that? It's 12 months from now? 3 months from now?
So the 12,500 starts last year will be completed, I suspect, in 24 months. It takes 2 years to complete homes. And so what you want to see is, are we this year, at the end of this full year, have we made around 14,000 starts for genuinely affordable homes? Because unless you start a home, unless you complete a home, you don't get paid the money.
I understand. And why did you accuse him of Tory propaganda? That seemed a little disingenuous.
Well, I've seen this number on Tory propaganda. I mean, the idea that we're not doing the starts, and actually what's important is for people to familiarise themselves with the history and the progress we've made. The progress we've made is record numbers of starts on genuinely affordable homes, record number of starts on social rent. The criticism from members of the Tory party is we're not doing more. Well, I would do more if the government gave us more grant and if we didn't have the uncertainty of Brexit leading to developers pausing starting new homes.
Just to be absolutely clear, Russell, that I've got my head around this. You are complaining about houses not being completed, and the Mayor is providing the details of the number of houses that have been started.
Well, look, it certainly doesn't take 24 months to finish a house.
Just yes or no.
No.
Because I want to be clear that I understand. Is that what's happened during this exchange? Your numbers, quite understandably, are focusing upon how many houses were finished in a 3-month window.
So if you just let me finish my point, the number.
Well, just rather you answered my question, Russell. Is that what we're talking about?
The number for housing starts halved in the last 12 months. Mr. Khan refers to 12,000. That's the previous year. The current year starts were only 6,000.
There you go.
So
Respond to that.
Record numbers, but he's not starting or finishing.
Can I hear what he says?
That is the truth.
Well, the number of starts last year were 12,500 plus. They broke the record. My target this year is 14,000. The most number of starts happened in quarter 3, quarter 4. And I'm confident this year will meet the target we've made. If we meet the target of 14,000, that's another record broken. And what Russell can do is book a call at my next speech, Sadiq, after the year has ended, and we can see whether I've met 14,000 or not. Why don't we agree to that, Russell?
I look forward to that because you're nowhere near it.
Well, why don't you start following me on Twitter and I'll start publicising the starts we do. I bet you do.
Okay.
I do.
Shall we carry on?
Thanks, Russell, for your call. And I'm hoping before the next time you ring in, you'll get a full picture of the starts we've made since I became Mayor. The next call is from Stratford. Rahil, good morning.
Good morning.
How's it going, man? You got a question for me? Otherwise, James will interrupt.
I do indeed. My name is Rahil Bhatt. I'm the founder and director of Community and Rehabilitation Solutions. I'm a former offender, a former extremist, and I've been through the cycle of crime. Through the cycle of crime and understanding all the bad that I've been through, I try to do good, and I set up CRS to help people to stop them from going through the pathways of getting involved with crime and violence and extremism, terrorism, etc. The whole part is that my question to you is, how are you going to support former offenders like myself to get the platform that we deserve as community members to change our own community and help those that are on pathways towards crime and get them away from those cycles into a better course of life. We've found a lot of difficulty actually getting accepted into mainstream society as former offenders, and I can go on more about explaining.
No, please don't. I just want the question clearly in a sentence, Rahil, if you could.
How are you going to support former offenders?
Yeah,
right.
Rahil,
is this relevant to the GPS tagging that you've announced?
No, it's relevant to that, but it's also relevant to other stuff we're doing now because we've got some more devolution of powers from the MOJ, the Ministry of Justice, Rahil, and this is really important. So there's two things. One is obviously we want to stop people becoming offenders in the first place. Most first-time offenders are below the age of 18. So if you can stop somebody becoming an offender, that's half the job done. The second issue is when somebody has offended, how do we rehabilitate them? It's really important that not only are people punished, but they're reformed as well. And one of the things we're trying to do is to persuade employers to employ people who have got convictions, spent convictions, and that's really important. And because there's a stigma attached with somebody who's been convicted, and we can't have it both ways. On the one hand, complain that somebody's not being rehabilitated. On the other hand, complain not take on people who've got convictions. And we're doing a number of things to help people who've been convicted. James alluded to the tags. We know, unfortunately, too many people who leave custody will reoffend. I think the figure that I've seen in the past is 66%. One way to help somebody be rehabilitated is for them not to reoffend. And so what we've started doing is a pilot in 4 boroughs in London where there's the highest knife crime to tag those who leave prison for a knife offence, and that will help them hopefully not reoffend because they know they've got a tag on them. But if they will also reduce, we hope, knife crime as well. But also what you want is retraining, and what we're trying to do is help people be retrained to get a job. And so we're working with the MOJ to make sure we can try and improve the system of rehabilitating those who've left prisons, or, by the way, young offenders institutions as well. And one of our messages to employers, there are some really good employers who already do this, is not to stigmatise and not take on people because they are an offender. Like Timpsons are really, really good. They take on people who actually train them in prison, so they've got the skills after they leave prisons. We need to make sure more employers do that as well.
Sadiq Khan, can you get your... I mean, look, I understand what you're saying and I respect that, but...
Briefly, Raheel, in a sentence.
Before you look at every other organisation, look at your own statutory services itself, because it's not enough being done in Newham specifically. Your services are at war with each other, let alone getting us the opportunity to help others. So literally, there's too much bias, unfortunately.
Sure, I think it's a fair point about bias, by the way. Employers are prejudiced against those who've got convictions. We're going to try and remove that prejudice, particularly for spent convictions. The next caller is from Kensington. It's Andrew. Good morning, Andrew.
Yep. Morning. I've heard all the jazz. Very quick question. Churchill, villain or hero?
I think you can't answer that question in a flippant one-word answer. I think one of the things... But can I say this? If you look at the John McDonnell interview, it was a sort of jokey part of an evening, and he was given a choice of 2 words. My view is what this has highlighted is that we need to have a more rounded view of everyone. Look, Winston Churchill was a remarkable wartime leader, but he wasn't perfect. You know, somebody of my ethnic origin in particular knows some of the consequences of some of his policies and some of his views, and so you've got to have a rounded view of everyone. And I think, look, let's talk about, of course, the massive achievement that he had as the leader of our country and the role he played in the Allies defeating the fascists. Many of the rights we enjoy. We talked about protest today because of that defeat of fascism. But let's not pretend he was a perfect individual. Even those who have written biographies of Churchill would accept that he was fallible, and some of the views he held and some of the things some of the things he did, on hindsight, are very, very questionable. What's your view, Andrew?
But these views were very common. But these views were very common views of the day.
Is it not? It's not the perfect distillation of the dangers of binary public discourse. Because no one is either 100% hero or 100% villain.
Of course.
Everybody's a bit of both. Well, actually, the best people perhaps are a bit of both. Some people are mostly villainous.
Well, speak for yourself, James. I
was thinking of politicians.
No, but I think the point is this, Andrew. I think context is important, and basically we often do interviews as politicians, and we're asked for yes or no answers, or love or loathe, or hero or villain. And I think that's the context.
But McDonnell dropped a clanger, didn't he? I mean, he should have done what you've just done. He should have either said both or neither. Well,
look, listen. I mean, I think it's important to make sure that we have a well-rounded view of everyone, both present-day politicians and politicians from the past. I think there is some ridiculous hysterical games being played by some people who are trying to, say that this hides some sort of ulterior motives that John has. That he will champion, lefties and not Churchill. That's not true. I mean, John McDonnell spent some time yesterday clarifying his position. But if we don't answer a question we're asked, hero or villain, we're criticised for faffing around and not answering a question directly. So we can't win.
Good. Sadiq Khan, that concludes the latest edition of Speak to Sadiq.
Well, listen, can I say to your listeners, next week listen to the James O'Brien show, because he's not here. And there's a brilliant list of people presenting. I've just seen my good mate Dave Lammy come in here, and I just say, listen, next week is the week to listen to. Forget the week after.
Yeah. Any word on when Jerry